Hello, cookie artists. My name is Ash. I am elated to be here with you. Today, I will be demonstrating how I decorate cookies with edible dusts instead of an airbrush. I find that there's no airborne pigments with dusts, that there's less cleanup, and I don't have an airbrush. Maybe you don't either. Well, today you're in luck. Our cookie is a snow globe and my gloves are on and ready to go. Our first step is preparation. We're going to prepare the black modeling chocolate with 2 molds, one for a bow and one for the small holly leaves. Here's the black modeling chocolate. Here are some examples of ones that I did beforehand. Here's the holly up close and a few bows. You can store these really easily in an airtight container until you're ready to decorate your cookie. So let's get started. Here's the modeling chocolate. It's firm, it's room temperature. It's leaving behind little crumbs. First, what we're going to do is put it in between our hands. And what I like to do is put it between my palms and warm it up. So we warm it up to the temperature of our hands, and then it starts to become pliable. And you can see at first it's difficult for me. I'm having a little bit of struggle pulling and pushing that modeling chocolate back into itself, but as I work, all of a sudden, there we go. It's the right temperature and I can do things with it. So I'm going to take just a little bit, put it into the bow mold and tap it in with my fingers. Give it a little wiggle. And then I'll be using a piece of parchment and a small roller, pressing down firmly so that all of the little crevices inside the bow mold are filled with the modeling chocolate and we get that perfect shape that we want. Sometimes a small roller like this can make your little piece buckle, so I'll put another silicone mold on top of it and then roll it, and then everything stays nice and flat and secure. I always wear powder-free gloves when I'm working with modeling chocolate. They prevent fingerprints as well as the chocolate being transferred to your skin and then possibly onto your cookie or other surfaces. The gloves keep everything nice and clean. Here I'm using pre-colored modeling chocolate, so it came black and I didn't have to make it that dark color. I know that you can, but it's always easy. I work with white for everything else except when I need black, and then I get specifically already made black modeling chocolate, and I just work it in my hands again for the little holly leaves, pushing down, making sure I'm filling all those crevices. I press until the modeling chocolate is flush with the surface of the silicone mold, and then I scrape away any leftovers from the sides. Now here's a little Thingamagenie tool that I'll use because it's flat and not a metal blade. It's plastic and won't cut the silicone, but it will pull the modeling chocolate, the excess modeling chocolate. I'm going to roll again, make everything really flat. And here's a fondant smoother. Can also be used for modeling chocolate and to make the tops of your cookies flat as soon as they come out of the oven. We're going to release the sides and the edges of the first bow that we made. And you can see how that kind of opens up the silicone mold and the little bow inside wiggles a little bit. We're going to turn it upside down and press it against the work surface and just peel just the silicone mold away, and then a bow will be left over. It's important not to squeeze or handle the modeling chocolate bow too much after it's come out of the bow mold. It'll be tender and can get misshapen. The same with the holly leaves. So I just handle them really gently. And again, just pull away the sides. Clear up any excess pieces of modeling chocolate by just pressing them in toward the center and again wiggling them down with the temperature of your fingertips. Can always reflatten with your little parchment and roller. And we'll pull away those sides. Where we pull it up, but it doesn't quite come out. So I'm going to give it a little wiggle, a little bend, and now it's out. Now I'm not going to pick it up right away with my fingers because those little edges of the holly leaves are so delicate. We are on to the next step. So I'm grabbing my icing, my cookie cutter that's shaped like a snow globe, and my edible marker. Get these little guys out of here. I'll bring in my cookie and I'll show you how I trace with the cookie cutter to get that perfect, nearly perfect round circle for the globe. So as you can see, I've already done it here, but let's line it up. I'll line it up with the sides of the cookie, and then I take my edible marker and I go all the way around the sphere, but I stop when the sphere stops. And then I take my cookie cutter and I turn it upside down, I invert it, and I finish the circle on the bottom with that same sphere. Then I take my flood consistency icing and I just outline that and give a little squiggle in the middle so that my icing puffs nicely. You can cut your icing bag a little wider. After, what I do is I put my outline, and then I make the hole in my icing bag a little wider to make it easier on my hand when I do the main flooding. I start at the edge where I've already got icing, and hopefully that icing is still a little wet, so when I bring my flood to it, they meet and kind of marry. As I go, I fill in the little gaps that I've left behind, and I do use the icing bag. My flood consistency icing is a little thicker than maybe you're used to, but I really like to wiggle and jiggle it along the way, and it all evens out. Now after I've finished around the edges, I go to the center and I make a little squiggle, and at this point I make my icing bag, I make the hole in my icing bag a little bit wider just to be easier on my hands even more. You can see it's opening up a little bit when I go to flood en masse. I prefer to decorate the flattest side of my cookie. So as you can see, I decorate what we call the backs of the cookie, the side that is facing down when it's in the oven baking. This allows me to add any chunky ingredients I want to my sugar cookie recipes, like bits of apple or strawberry or nuts. It also leaves the other side of the cookie open for an embossed message in the dough. Now I'm going to jiggle the cookie turntable that I have my cookie resting on to allow the icing to even out, settle into place, and show me where the bubbles are. I can also plump up any spots that need a little extra icing love. Now I'm going to show you the scribe tool that I use to pop the bubbles underneath the surface of the icing. There's one! Okay, got it. I can also get little pieces of fuzz that fly down and stick to my icing. There, we'll just fix that. We're going to let that dry overnight so that it's strong enough to be able to stand the stencil being pressed up against it. Next, we'll get our stencil holder out, and it's already got our tree-lined stencil placed inside. You can see the silhouette that we're going to create on the cookie. We'll be dry brushing a whole forest of trees, so we'll move this stencil around on our cookie a few times before we're done. The first pigmented dust that I'm going to use to dry brush our design is called green tea, and you can see that it's very light, almost like a sea foam, but the official color is called green tea. So I put a little bit in the cap of the container, and I take my brush, and I, just like if I were putting on eyeshadow, I very gently take a little bit of color on the end of my brush, and I dust it onto those clear spots where the trees are. And you can see I've taken my Thingamagenie tool and I'm pressing down on the plastic part of the stencil so that none of my dust creeps underneath the edges of the design. Each time I put more dust on my brush, I make sure to dab it off just a little bit onto my paper towel before I place it onto my cookie and start applying the color. This lets me have more control. It takes a little bit longer, but I like the gradient that I'm able to achieve. Like creating a smoky eye and eyeshadow, we're making it look like there's mist underneath these trees, and it's all an illusion because it's what I'm not dry brushing that is making it look like mist. So I didn't put any mist on the cookie. The mist is the negative space I'm leaving behind. I concentrate my color at the top of each tree, starting out and then diffusing it down toward the center. And then before I get to the bottom, I've totally brushed that color away. Now I'll move the cookie again to shake up the variety of the tree line. We want it to be a whole forest. So where do we want those next trees to be? Wherever you want them is the right place. The trees in the back are a little bit lighter, so we won't go down as far with the color when we dry brush these treetops. This continues that illusion of mist in many layers throughout the forest and makes it look like there are trees that are there that we can't see because that mist is so thick in places. Some of these trees are just the treetops. They're just suggestions of treetops. We just want them sort of whispering that they're there, but very subtly. Let's move our cookie again. Let's get a different tree line going. And let's clean up some of the dust that's accumulated so we're not scraping it around as we move our cookie under our stencil. There we go. A nice fan brush will totally take care of that. Make sure that you use one that is only used for food products. I'm going to rearrange the stencil on the sweet stencil holder here so that our trees give me a little more variety than they are, so I can pick and choose where each one of my trees go. So don't let the stencil tell you where the trees go. You tell the stencil where the trees are going to go on your cookie. Dusting on the last few trees, we can see that our forest has totally come together and it's super misty and mysterious. I'll take it out of the stencil holder here and we'll move this aside so we can look at how good it looks. That looks pretty good. Okay, the next dust we're going to be using is called Periwinkle, and we're going to be using a more close bristled brush with this, so you can see it's pretty tight bristled. Just a little brush. To get that color more concentrated, we'll be creating a halo of periwinkle around the edges, not the very bottom, but around the other edges of the snow globe. It's going to make it look like glass, like the part in the middle is more clear, and the part around the outside, the halo, is distorted by the fact that it's a globe and glass and magnified. I'm using my small brush to press the pigment into the side of the icing. This is petal dust. It's highly pigmented and a little bit sticky. In fact, we'll diffuse some of this color with a fluffier brush. It's still really small. We'll use it to blend this edge into a soft line. All the dusts I'm using today are 100% edible and FDA approved. The next pigment we'll be dry brushing onto our cookie today is called Dove Gray, and it is also petal dust. We'll be using a separate little fluffy brush because we don't want to transfer the color from the periwinkle onto our gray area. See how the pigment is still on the brush? You can compare these two brushes. They're almost the same, but that little bit of pigment left behind really makes a difference when you're just barely putting color on. So this is going to be our gray sky. We don't want any periwinkle in our sky. This sky is here to show the difference between the white mist that's floating around the trees and the hazy atmosphere above. I find the most difficult part of dry brushing is self-restraint. I want to put more color on because it's so fun, but just a little bit of Dove Gray will do the trick. We're going to paint some trunks on our trees now. I've got a little mixing tool, I've got some edible adhesive, and I've got a fine tip brush. This is a super fine tip, and that is what is going to give us our itty bitty little tree trunks. I'm also using high grain alcohol and sparkle dust that is 100% edible. I have a little palette here that's got some press and seal paper on it. You can see I just push down on each little well so that I've got an indentation, but my palette is totally clean when I'm done. I just rip the paper off. So I got some edible adhesive here. I've got the mahogany color. Sparkle dust is different than luster dust or petal dust as it's not sticky on its own. That is why whenever I'm using sparkle dust, I always use it with an edible adhesive so that it sticks to the cookie. Otherwise, it'll just whoosh, blow right off. I'm mixing this up super fast. As you can see, I've combined the pigment that's in the sparkle dust with the moisture of the edible adhesive, and it's all come together so I can paint with it now. Our trunks are barely there. They're just a little suggestion of trunks. It's just one little line and it kind of glides pretty easily. And it might even leave some little tracks of places where there's no sparkle dust, and that's okay because the mist is blocking some of the trunk and we can't see it all. That's why the trunks aren't going all the way to the ground, because they are disappearing into the mist. Grabbing my flood consistency icing, I'm just going to start putting little branches and little snow drifts all over my trees. And these are really random and completely up to you. I looked at trees and how snow lands on trees and rests on tree limbs, and it is so random. It's mostly just horizontal lines that sort of angle in and out every once in a while with little dots and speckles of snow around them. Any places that I feel like my blobs of icing are too big, I'll go back with my scribe tool and I'll just scrape away some of the little edges or some of the centers, because I can just go in and maybe expose that trunk that I covered up a little too much of. Now we're going to let that crust over in front of a fan for a few minutes. And I get my edible adhesive. And I get some more sparkle dust. This is Super Pearl sparkle dust. And I spritz that into my edible adhesive with another color of sparkle dust, turquoise. And I've just done a few little pumps of each of these. And then with my brush, this is just a random brush. It really just matters that it's small. I'm not mixing in the color to the adhesive. I'm just barely combining the glitter and the adhesive so that it doesn't release the pigment that is in the glitter. It's just going to act as a glaze over the trees. And it's going to make every one of our branches and boughs shiny and sparkly and look like they're glistening. Adding the last few details of glaze, you can see that everything's sparkly and beautiful and turning out just how I wanted. This is the last step for the snow globe. Next, we're going to be working on the base. So we'll get out our edible marker and we use the felt tip end. And we'll follow the first little bump on each side of the base, and we'll connect those with a rounded line, find the center, make a little arrow, and turn that arrow into an M that's kind of buff, and then it turns into a dragon leg. Draw a little elf shoe here, starting from the center inside and then the outside. And we're done. We have our base shape. Grabbing our medium consistency black icing, we are going to outline the legs of the base. I let my icing drop down onto my cookie and then I move into the next position. If this icing was too thick of a consistency, I wouldn't be able to pipe these fine lines because it wouldn't come out of the little hole in the piping bag. But this is a medium consistency icing, so it's lying down really nicely and doing just what I want. Down the center of each leg, I'm going to put a little squiggle of icing so that it'll support the puff that we're going to flood in later. Again, I let my icing drop down to the surface of my cookie as I outline the rim of the base. And I put a little bit of icing down the center like I did the legs, so it'll support that puff when we flood it. Now we're flooding the legs, and you can see it's sped up, but I'm using my icing bag to fill in the little spaces that are left behind, giving one more outline to the edge right along the globe itself. That's going to give me a nice border and touch the globe to the base in a contact way that I want, not just based solely on the amount of pressure that I'm putting on my bag as the icing is coming out. Everything's looking even. This is good. Let's get to work on some of the details. Let's put a dot here and 2 little dots, one on each side, and we'll make those prettier with the scribe tool. Connect those from the center out to the edge, and you can see my icing didn't quite make it, so I'm just going to connect it again by letting the tip of the icing fall down to the spot where I want it to start, and then pulling up and over to lead it into place. I'll repeat these 2 lines, making them just a little bit stronger, a little bit thicker, and with this medium consistency icing, it won't flood everywhere. It'll just make it a nice bar. So we'll let that crust over, and we'll outline the legs. One on each of the outside lines, and one down the center, just a little line, and then we'll put a dot and a matching dot on the other side. Let's add a dot to the center and one here. So we've got 3 on the center leg, just on the tippy toes. Those 2 side legs look a little bit like elf shoes to me. I like the little black ball on the end of each one of them, reminds me of a little bell. Giving that base a final outline. We're going to let this dry overnight because our next step is going to be painting it with luster dust. I've got our black luster dust right here, and I'm also going to use a little bit of alcohol, which evaporates in seconds and leaves no flavor behind. The luster dust is sticky, but I don't want it to puff and disperse everywhere in the area I'm painting it. I want to be really specific with where I put it down, so I'm going to mix it with a little bit of alcohol and use my paintbrush ever so delicately and slowly. I'll add some shine and some metallic finish to all the black details of the Snowglobe's base. And what that's going to do is it's going to give it kind of a gunmetal look. It's going to bring out all of the edges and all of the lines, and all of the details will become shiny and more visible because of this luster dust. And I'm putting it on with alcohol because I want it to go exactly in the spots that I want it to go. I don't want it to have any side dust puffing out over the edge of my cookie and making my cookie black as well. We're going to use this same alcohol and luster dust, black luster dust, to paint the gunmetal look on our little pieces of modeling chocolate. So we have them right here. Here's our bow and our holly. I'm going to leave the centers of both of these black. I'm not going to paint any luster or sparkle on the centers of the holly leaves, down that center aisle there basically, or in the center side sections of the bow. That's going to make it look like it's really old metal, that it's oxidized. Here's another luster dust we're going to use. This is bronze luster dust. And we're going to put it on with a little sponge that I only use for food, but it is originally designed to be a makeup sponge. And we're just going to touch just the edges, just the pokey outy parts. We're just going to highlight basically all of the little spots that might show a little bit more dimension, a little bit more color around the edges of the holly. So we'll get all the little pokey outy parts and the berries, and we'll get the edges, but we'll leave the centers nice and dark and not shiny, and that'll give a contrast later that'll look like a deep shadow. Let's take this bronze luster party to the base, and we'll get those little details, all the lines and the dots and a little bit of the body too. We'll get that with some luster dust, and we'll double, triple layer on the dots so that they show up more, and very carefully we'll work on those fine lines with just the very tip of the sponge. And we'll give the body just a little suggestion of luster, but we'll leave most of it black. I am satisfied with that. Let's get these on here. Where are they gonna go? Let's put them in their places and see what it's gonna look like. Grabbing our medium consistency black icing, we're just gonna put a little line down the center of the bow and attach it to the base of the snow globe. And with my fingers, I just very gently press down. And I'll repeat that same thing with the holly. I put a little line of black, just enough to make it stick, but not enough so that it squishes out the sides and is very visible. And we'll do the final piece of holly. You can see up close, just a little squiggle of icing. And I drop that little piece of holly in place. And I use my finger very gently, just pressing it down, making sure the icing and the modeling chocolate are all making contact with each other. And then I'm going to bring my edible adhesive back. And we've got that same mahogany sparkle dust. And we've got just sort of a medium brush. It's a small brush, but it doesn't have a very tight bristle. And using the edible adhesive and the mahogany sparkle dust, I'm going to highlight just the edges of all the little details that are already looking gunmetal, bronzy. So they have a little more personality. And it deepens that sort of rusty bronze color too, just around the edges. And I give a little extra to the berries. We want those berries to shine. I'll add just a touch extra to the base around this side, and then I'll turn it and make sure we're sort of even around this side. Get those dots again. Make sure everything's nice and mahogany and sparkly, and just very gently put some sparkle on these bars here. Just enough to show, but not enough to get it onto the globe. And that's it. We're all done. Congratulations. We have decorated a cookie together. Thank you for joining me. Again, I'm Ash. Thank you so much for watching.